And our third main topic today gets submitted to us by Thomas Paterson. And Thomas writes, I, like too few others, went to go see The Suicide Squad this weekend. I loved it. I was shocked to see that it only made $26.5 million on its opening. That after Jungle Cruise posted $35 million last weekend despite poorer reviews. It even had a decent hold this weekend. Is this because of HBO Max? Unlike Disney Plus is offering the film for free past subscription costs. It's got to be more than the pandemic, right? All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And yeah, listen, Rob, I remember a week or two ago, we were talking about Suicide Squad. And somebody asked, how much do I think it's going to make opening weekend? Like $50 million, $60 million, some people were saying. And I said, look, as great, because I had already seen the movie. I said, as great as this movie is, and it's great, the reality is it's going to fall in the $25 to $35 million range. Probably $30, $31 million, something around that. I can't remember exactly what I said. You guys can go back and check the video, but it was somewhere in that neighborhood. And the movie is absolutely magnificent. It's absolutely magnificent. Such a fun time. I mean, all film is subjective, so it's not going to be for everybody. No film is. So there are going to be people who watch it and legitimately don't enjoy it as much, and that's cool. I thought it was bloody fantastic. Anyway, the reality is it came out right around where we expected. About $26.5 million is what it made at the box office. For a movie that cost $180 million to make, there's no sugarcoating this, Rob. That's a disaster. There's no sugarcoating it. It is an absolute disaster for them that this movie came out. Now, look, again, some people thought it would make, some projections said, oh, it's probably make around 30 to 40. But a lot of people ignored that because they heard the movie was so great, or they saw the early fan screenings of it and said, this movie's fantastic. It's going to make 60 million. It's going to make 70 million. And rightfully, that's what this movie deserved. But it did not do all that well. It did terribly. Now, I'm sure it did better if the movie had been terrible. If the movie had been terrible, it probably would have made $15 million opening weekend. So it probably did roughly double the business because of how good it is. But it does raise the question about why did that movie not do so well? Now, Rob, last week, I ran down a list of why I didn't think Suicide Squad was going to do very well at the box office. I ran down a list. I said, here's why I'm only think it's going to make around 30. I want to revisit that list and add a couple of more. Because the question a lot of people are asking today, understandably so, is why the Suicide Squad flopped. Why did it flop? And it's more than one reason. It's a collection of reasons. The first one we're going to talk about here is this. Number one, the pandemic. Look, the reality is, while more than half the people in the country are now vaccinated, the fact of the matter is, with the Delta variant, there's a new resurgence of it, and it's been climbing again, and people have been concerned. Now, obviously, every movie that's come out would have done better had it not been for the pandemic. Like, even though, Fast 9 has done very good business, despite being a terrible movie, but Fast 9 did very, very good business. Everybody knows if it wasn't for the fact that we were in the pandemic era, it would have done better. Quiet Place 2 did very, very well for itself, but everybody knows if it wasn't for the pandemic, it would have done better. Godzilla vs. Kong did great. It would have done better. So we knew that this was going to be one of the things of it. By the way, new report just came out from, I can't remember the name of the hospital organization down in Florida. They just put out, they're saying their average COVID cases in their hospitals is 179 patients right now per hospital. And they're saying out of that 179, like 8 of them are vaccinated, which means out of the 179 people in hospital from COVID right now, 171 of them are for unvaccinated people, only 8 from vaccinated. And they say they have 20 people on ventilators that are keeping them alive. Only 1 of them is a vaccinated person. So you have a 95% better chance if you're vaccinated. Just get vaccinated, people, if you have the opportunity, please. Anyway, so you can't ignore it. The pandemic is definitely one of the reasons. It's not the only reason. I mean, we see people going to sporting events and to restaurants and things like that. So it's not the de facto reason, but it's definitely one you have to take into consideration. Reason number 2, and we talked about this last week. It's R-rated. Now you said, but John, Deadpool was R-rated, made $700. Yeah. Deadpool did make over $700 million and it's R-rated. Guess what? That would have been $1 billion film if it wasn't. I mean, look, all you have to do is look at all the numbers. The statistic, Rob, you pointed this out yourself before. You just look at the numbers. R-rated films don't do as well as PG-13 films in general. There's the odd spike for sure, but when you average it out, the R rating, limiting the number of people who can go to see it, is going to hurt it. It's not the reason, obviously not, but it's one of the reasons that gets factored into that. So, and that's what we said last week. We said, look, the R rating is going to have an impact on it as well. All right, number 3. The first Suicide Squad baggage. By baggage, I mean the fact that even though the first Suicide Squad movie was a huge hit at the box office, most people hated it. I am one of those people that actually quite enjoy. I had a good time with, I'm not going to lie. I know it was a hot mess of the movie. I had fun with the first Suicide Squad movie. So suck on it. I don't care. But the reality is a lot of people hated it. And I think it only had like a 20-some% critic rating, and the audience rating wasn't fantastic either. And, so that baggage, that carries over, especially when the name of the movie is basically identical. It's the same. They probably should have renamed this thing Task Force X. They probably should have just renamed the movie to Task Force X. Maybe it wouldn't have had as strong of an association with it. But be that as it may, the first Suicide Squad baggage is something we mentioned last week was going to be one of the things that hurt this. That a lot of people will remember seeing the first Suicide Squad, not liking it. So if there's another Suicide Squad movie, no thanks, I'm good. So that was going to play a part of it too. The next one, completely unknown characters. I'm not talking about actors. I'm talking about characters. Now, you can make an argument for Harley Quinn, but we'll talk about Harley Quinn in a second. The reality is, nobody's heard of Bloodsport. You say Bloodsport, what do you think of, Rob? Think of Jean-Claude Van Damme.
It's Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, fighting in the octagon or whatever.
With you will be next. That's, you think of Bloodsport. You think of the movie, you don't think of that. Who the hell has heard of Polka Dot Man? Outside of hardcore comic book fans. Ratcatcher 2? What? Now, you can make an argument that, hey, John, James Gunn did a movie with characters like Rocket Raccoon and Groot and Drax the Destroyer. Yes, he did. But he also did that in an MCU that was firing on all cylinders at the time. And it should be pointed out, Rob, that it's not like that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie made $1 billion. And if it had been filled with recognizable characters that a lot of the audience had known, it probably would have done even better at the box office. But I really do think coming into a DC film that you remove the name Harley Quinn, which we will talk about in a second, and you're left with King Shark, Polka Dot Man, Ratcatcher, Peacemaker. You're filled with all these characters that nobody knew about. Is that the reason that this Suicide Squad movie bombed at the box office? No. But is it one of the contributing factors? Absolutely it is. It's absolutely one of the contributing factors. But that leads us directly into reason number 5. Harley Quinn. The devaluation of Harley Quinn. Specifically, I mean, as it pertains to Birds of Prey and the Fabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. The one recognizable character name in this movie is Harley Quinn. But with Suicide Squad carrying a bunch of baggage over, even the name of Harley Quinn was carrying over some baggage because that Birds of Prey movie sucked. Now, all film is subjective. There are people who enjoyed it, and if you did, that's awesome. I'm jealous. I wish I could have enjoyed it too. But the movie was terrible, in my opinion. Absolutely terrible. And so when you take a character, a highly valued IP, and you throw it into something terrible, the value of that character drops as well. And so whereas the Harley Quinn character was a super hot property coming out of the first Suicide Squad movie, even though a lot of people didn't like the movie, they all loved her. I think that property got devalued with Birds of Prey. And so is the devaluation of the character of Harley Quinn the reason Suicide Squad bombed? No. But is it a reason? I think it's one of the reasons that you have to consider. There's also this. You know, Rob, Forbes did an article yesterday, I think, that also laid out their reasons. And one of the reasons they gave, I thought, was actually pretty interesting and one that I had not considered before. The Will Smith sequel pattern. What's that? Will Smith movies that get a sequel without Will Smith in them. How have those done? Go back and look at Independence Day 2. How'd that do without Will Smith? Huh? How'd that do without Will Smith? Or Men in Black. The new Men in Black. The Will Smith franchise Men in Black. Let's make another one without Will Smith. How did that do? Now, of course, those, Independence Day 2, the most recent Men in Black they did, it didn't help that those movies were both also awful movies. That didn't help as well. But I mean, there is a little bit of a pattern emerging here of Will Smith hits that get sequels without Will Smith in them and see what happens. Again, am I saying that is the reason Suicide Squad flopped? Absolutely not. But is it a contributing factor? I think you have to acknowledge that it is a contributing factor. So you got the pandemic. You got the fact that it was R-rated. You had baggage in the audience over the first Suicide Squad movie. It's a movie that is filled with completely unrecognizable and unknown characters to the audience. You have the devaluation of the Harley Quinn character, which was the one bankable character name you had in this movie. You had the Will Smith sequel pattern, another Will Smith hit that goes on to do a sequel without Will Smith. There's that. And then, of course, you got HBO Max. And there's two things about HBO Max. Okay? Two things about HBO Max. A bunch of people stayed home to watch it. And that's one we all know, right? Warner Brothers stabbed this movie in the back. They undermined its chances for success when they were making it. And unlike Black Widow, where at least if people, the one deterring factor for Black Widow on Disney Plus is you got to pay an extra $30 to see it. With Suicide Squad, you can just stay at home and watch it for free. You can just pop it on for free. And not only does that kill a bunch of people going to see it for the first time, Rob, but it also kills repeat viewing. Because most people I know, and I'm sure for a lot of you guys it's the same thing, if you saw it once and loved it, where were you watching it the second time? You're probably just going to pop it on HBO because you've already seen it. Like you did your duty. You went to go see it in theaters. You saw it the best way possible on the big screen, had the best experience with it possible. But it kills repeat viewing, and it kills bringing friends with you to repeat viewings. It hurt a lot. But the one thing that we haven't talked about a lot, Rob, but you have mentioned this about other films before in other circumstances, and I think it's really astute to this, and that is this. Not only being on HBO Max, did it prevent some people from going the first time? It certainly prevented a lot of people from going a second time because now they could just watch it at home. But is this, there is still this perception amongst the audience, and there's no denying this. There still is a perception about the audience that a movie on TV is a lesser movie. That's the perception. Rob, you've talked before about how, getting a movie in the theaters and having it in theaters, a theatrical run, that gives it a panache. It gives it a status, if you will. Where now when it comes out on home video, it's like, oh yeah, this movie played in theaters, blah, blah. There is still a perception, whether it's fair or not, there is still a perception amongst average fans, not the hardcore fans, but the average fans, that a movie that is playing straight on television is a lesser movie. It devalues the status of the movie. It devalues the gravitas of the movie. So it even changes the perception of the movie to a lot of audiences. Is the HBO Max release the sole reason why Suicide Squad flopped at the box office? No, absolutely not. But is it one of the contributing factors? You'd be a fool not to acknowledge it. So it's a number of things, and there are probably more, but just to run this down again, you have things like the pandemic, obviously, the pandemic. You have things like it was R-rated. Well, we always know that about R-rated films. That the first Suicide Squad made it bring along a bunch of baggage because of the name, obviously. It's filled with completely unknown characters that aren't going to get the audience excited on their own. The devaluation of the Harley Quinn character as a result of the Birds of Prey movie. The Will Smith sequel pattern, trying to do a sequel to a smash Will Smith movie without Will Smith. The pattern so far is that hasn't done very well for people. And then, of course, the HBO Max thing, that a bunch of people stayed home to watch it. Certainly they stayed home to watch it the second time, even if they went the first time on that weekend. And that amongst the general population, the perception of a movie that's straight on TV is that it's a lesser movie. Again, none of these are the magic bullet, Rob. I'm not saying any of these are the one sole magic bullet that caused this. But Rob, I was saying a bunch of these things off this list before the movie got released. I said, this is why this movie, as great as it is going to struggle at the box office because it's fighting all these things. And none of them had anything to do with James Gunn, who did a magnificent job on this film and delivered a thoroughly entertaining thing, at least for people like me. But yeah, those are the things. Rob, you see my list here. Let me ask you this. Were you surprised to see the box office numbers come out for Suicide Squad? And then which of mine do you agree with? Do you have others? What do you attribute this, to be generous, this lackluster showing of Suicide Squad at the box office is?
Well, I agree with everything that you listed. Those are all contributing factors. But I'll go one better because I've been thinking about this, or not one better. I'll give you one more. I think that the reason that this movie didn't do what people hoped it would do, or what the industry even thought it would do, is exactly what makes it great. And that is James Gunn. I think that a lot of people, and I say this, the non-movie pundit space audience that we're talking to right now, not the people that are watching this show, because the people that are watching this show, just like fans of any property, we show up, we turn up, we know what's going on. I think that the actual James Gunn-ness of this whole movie did not translate to the general audience, not the audience watching this show right now, but the rest of the audience, the general audience that we need to show up for $180 million movies. Not the people that are following all the business of Hollywood and hang on every spoiler and trailer and piece of information that comes out. That's us. But it's everybody else. And I think they watch this movie and they're like, what is this? I really think that the James Gunn-ness, the tone, which is what we all love, which is what we go to see because we know what's up. I mean, it's one thing when it's called Guardians of the Galaxy and the whole perception of it is kind of goofy. You've got the MCU that's already surrounding it, but what are they going to do? How are they going to bring these characters together? I think that this movie is just too goofy for the general population. And I think that, while we loved it, it gives us everything. It checks all the boxes. And like you, I thought James Gunn did an extraordinary job directing this movie. We always talk about tone and this was a difficult tone, man. I mean, it could have spun off into oblivion very, very quickly, but it does not. That moment we talked about on the show on Friday when King Shark looks into the alleyway and sees two people
so brilliant.
Kissing.
So brilliant.
James Gunn is a brilliant guy, and he's a brilliant writer and a really great director. But I just think the general population, if you go to a character like King Shark, they're like, wait, what? Come on. And I think a lot of people, the very things that we love about it, turn people off. Because they obviously, when they catch up with this movie on HBO Max, they're going to think to themselves, I love this. This. They didn't realize what it was. And I think that was problematic. Even Warner Brothers leaned into it from the beautiful, horrible mind of James Gunn. People are like, who's James Gunn? They don't know who that is. I mean, we do because we're who we are. But I think that was the real problem here, is that I think that for those people, they should have done different, they should have targeted the ad campaigns at different kinds of people. You know, sell us the goofiness, but also they should have done one that was just hardcore action. Because there's some great action in this movie, and not made it goofy. But there's a tonal issue here that if you don't buy into it, I think you could find the movie to be a turnoff. And I think that's what really happened here.
And that speaks to the marketing campaign. Like, that's all the marketing campaign. And Rob, to your point, I had a buddy of mine, I've mentioned him a couple times on the show. A buddy of mine lives in Nashville. He texted me and he's like, hey man, this Suicide Squad movie. my buddy, my good friend that I've known for 20 plus years, Jeff, doesn't watch my show on a regular basis. So he's like, man, just Suicide Squad movie. But to exactly your point, Rob, he said, I thought the trailers looked like ass, so I had no interest in it, but I was just home one night, so I popped it on HBO. It's awesome. But that speaks exactly to what you're saying, that the trailers, like, for people who are not in the hardcore circles like we are, the trailers just made it look like something that, especially in the absence of recognizable characters, and with the baggage that came along with the other Suicide Squad, they just looked at it and said, what the hell is this?
That's right.
What is this?
That's exactly right.
And they didn't want to give it a shot. They didn't want to check it out. And I think, yeah, like, just as soon as you started saying that, I started thinking of my buddy who just wrote me. It's like, yeah, I thought I wasn't going to see this. It looks stupid. But man, have you seen this?
It's a real shame because, you know, I think the film did such a great job of both making a kick-ass, hardcore, R-rated action fantasy that actually had real heart, real stakes, really interesting. And then the humor, the irreverent, very indie, very trauma sensibilities that James Gunn has always had. I mean, it's really hard to put those two things together. It's hard for anyone, but James Gunn is the master of it. And the same way that someone like James Wan is the master of the jump scare. And I think that was really unfortunate, that what they needed to do, I don't think they should have done a bait and switch, but they should have, like, downplayed. If you don't think King Shark's funny, and a lot of people wouldn't, because I think it's just goofy, that when you show him, it's like, that looks kind of dumb to people, I guess, even though King Shark's now around in other things and people know who that character is. But I just think, like you said, a lot of people were turned off by it and don't understand what it really was. And I think people are going to discover it. It's going to be a movie that people are going to be talking about in 10 years.
I agree.
Really do.
I agree. I think this is one a lot of people are going to talk about in 10 years. I think this is going to be one that a lot of people discover long after the fact. And by the way, I put it on my Twitter the other day, Rob. I am not a tattoo guy. I have no tattoos. I don't plan on having tattoos. I'm not cool enough that I can pull off tattoos. I think if you got tattoos, that's great. I'm not cool enough. I can't pull off tattoos. But I would be lying, Rob, if I didn't mention that, man, I'm tempted to get a tattoo on my arm that says, book read, so smart me. I am very, very tempted. Book read, so smart me. Once I heard that first line, because Rob, you mentioned that one line in the trailer, right? Where you just see King Shark going, hand. It's like, all right. But once you're introduced to King Shark,
right,
and you get a sense of him and his childlikeness and his almost innocence in a way while he's murdering tons of people, all that kind of stuff, all of a sudden that line becomes a little bit more charming, but out of context, it just doesn't hit the right way. Anyway, and by the way, there is one other thing I should point out here on this list, and I'm seeing a bunch of guys in the live chat writing this in, and it's absolutely true. The other one, and this goes along with all streaming stuff, this is not unique to Suicide Squad, but any movie that's being debuted day and date, and that's piracy. I mean, it's one thing, Rob, not a lot of people out there are going to seek out these crappy little hiding under my jacket handy cam filming the movie screen and whatever. Yeah, some people can watch it like that if you have no taste, but most people don't look out for that stuff. But now with the digital streaming, Rob, you and I have talked about this. Now you have pristine, perfect copies of these movies that even if you're not an HBO Max member, you can still watch Suicide Squad in its full, perfect form. without it. So piracy has got to be considered one of those things as well. So we're going to add to this list. I'm going to put piracy, and we're going to add lack of appeal in marketing, as you were saying, Rob. So here's what we got. The pandemic, R-rated. First Suicide Squad movie baggage being carried over. Completely unknown characters. The devaluation of the Harley Quinn character. The Will Smith sequel pattern. HBO Max day and date release. Piracy. Lack of appeal to the general audience in marketing who don't really get what this film's about. And Rob, the reality is there's probably a dozen more. We said this 2 weeks ago, this Suicide Squad movie, as far as box office goes, was facing a very, very big uphill battle. A very big uphill battle. And it clearly was not able to overcome it. And all we can do, Rob, I said this on my spoiler review yesterday, is keep our fingers crossed and hope that once Discovery takes over Warner Brothers in probably early to mid 2022, that the CEO there says, you know what? They just handled that Suicide Squad thing wrong. This movie was great. The people who've seen it loved it. We need to give this thing another go, but we're going to do it right. We're going to treat it right. All that kind of stuff. That's the only thing we can hope, because I desperately want to see another one of these. But Rob, as things stand, what would you say the chances of, as things are, not with Discovery coming hopefully to save the day, but what would you think the chances are of another Suicide Squad movie like this being done anytime soon? And not just this Suicide Squad movie, but Rob, how does this hurt, or does it hurt, other potential hardcore, big budget, gritty kind of comic book movies coming? Does this hurt those as well? What do you think?
Well, you remember there's a Peacemaker TV series coming.
Yes, on HBO Max.
And James Gunn directed 6 episodes of that. And I'm wondering, I mean, obviously they made it, so they're going to put it up on HBO Max. I mean, we haven't heard the numbers. I would suspect that this movie is going to get discovered and people are going to watch it on HBO Max quite a bit. And maybe with the Peacemaker series, it'll do really, really well, and it'll exceed all their expectations. It'll be one of the most watched movies ever. And maybe that way we could end up seeing another Suicide Squad film. But right now, I think the prospects are quite distant that they're going to make it. But we are, and look, R-rated action movies, the John Wick franchise shows that they can work, but you just can't spend $180 million making them. And I think that's I mean, this movie, obviously, this film spared no expense. It's
oh yeah, there are some expensive movies that we look at and say, where did they spend the money? Suicide Squad, you see every dollar of that $100 million on the screen.
Yeah, it's all over the place. And I think, you have to tailor what movie you're making to and its budget. It's so funny now, everyone just throws all this money at things thinking that they're going to succeed without really taking into account like Star Trek movies. The modern J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot, the 3 Star Trek movies, they spent an enormous amount of money making those, but the Star Trek franchise has never made that much money theatrically at the box office, and they all underperform to a certain extent. But it's like, if you had made them for less money, you might have a more successful franchise. So could you do a Suicide Squad movie for $100 million instead of 180? Like, cut the budget in half? Maybe you could. I just don't know if they'll ever greenlight a movie now with what has happened here, even though I think that's too bad, because I thought this movie was a wildly entertaining time at the pictures. So yeah. It's too bad. It's a wonderful movie for what it is, and I'm sorry, James Gunn, it might be the most James Gunn of all James Gunn movies, and it should have succeeded way more than it did.
Yeah, I know. Ann and I, we're planning already this coming weekend. We're going to go to the theaters and do a double feature. We're going to go watch Free Guy again, and then follow that up same night with another Suicide Squad screening in the theaters. But anyway, guys, it's a big topic, but the question for you is this. Why do you think that this magnificent bastard of a movie, this Suicide Squad movie, so underperformed? I mean, again, not people hadn't had a chance to see it to know if it was good or bad. What was it? Was it some of the things that I listed? Can you think of some other reasons overall? Generally speaking, what are your thoughts? Jump down into the comment section below and leave your thoughts there.